Hello everyone and welcome to our panel discussion on the future of Canada's EV charging networks. I'm Nino Di Cara, founder of Electric Autonomy Canada, and I'm delighted to introduce today's discussion. A massive increase in EV charger deployments will be required to meet the anticipated surge in sales of EVs as automakers increasingly roll out deliveries of their new electrified products. It's a huge opportunity, but also an enormous challenge for industry participants and stakeholders responsible for deploying and installing them. So how do we move forward to plan these rollouts, and what should investors, site hosts, and more importantly, EV drivers expect from the technology that we're investing in? Well, that's what we'll be tackling today with a great panel of experts who I'm delighted are able to join us, and I'll introduce you to in just one moment. I'd like to make a special thank you to Roland Berger for supporting this event and making it possible. And some quick housekeeping items before I make the intros. If you have a question, we'd love to hear it. Please drop it into the Q&A section and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. And if you're making general comments on the conversation but not asking a specific question, please put those comments in the chat section. Right, well, let's meet our panel. They are Rahul Gangal, partner and leader of automotive and industrials at Roland Berger. Erin Stewart, managing director, Indigenous Clean Energy. Thierry Spies, senior manager, advanced vehicle programming, Natural Resources Canada. Louis Tremblay, president and CEO, Add Energy and Flow. David Patterson, Vice President, Corporate and Environmental Affairs at GM. And Emma Jarrett, Managing Editor, Electric Autonomy Canada, who's going to be moderating the discussion today. Now, one thing I'd just like the audience to note is that Erin Stewart's flight to Kujak in Nunavik has unfortunately been delayed by a couple of hours. She is expecting to land any minute, and she is hoping to connect with us visually or by phone, and so we're hoping that she will be able to join the conversation as the conversation proceeds. But if for any reason Erin isn't able to join us because she does better with aeroplanes and airports, we will be following up with an interview with her and making sure that we really bring the perspective of the Indigenous community to this conversation. So with that, over to Emma to get the conversation started.
Thanks, Nino. It's great to see everybody. And as Nino said, we're fingers crossed, hoping Erin can join us in a minute, but we will kick off now with some short introductions just so that our audience knows who everyone is. So Rahul, if I could start with you, just a few lines about who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Rahul. I'm a senior partner with Roland Berger. Roland Berger is one of the top 5 strat consulting firms in the world, and possibly the go-to firm for automotive electrification, sustainability linked topics. And I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks. Louis?
Hey everyone, thanks Emma. Thanks everyone to be here. I'm Louis Tremblay. I'm the founder, president, and CEO of Flow. Flow is a vertically integrated charging network company. We operate a network of 65,000 chargers across North America. We have more than 400 employees, so we do everything from residential charger to fast charger, curbside charger. And I can definitely witness that Rahul and Roland Berger are a great partner into the EV transition.
Thanks. Thierry.
Thanks, Emma. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Thierry Spies with Natural Resources Canada. I'm the Senior Manager of the Advanced Vehicle Program, responsible for light-duty vehicle policy for the department, as well as overseeing a number of initiatives. For example, the Zero Emission Vehicle Awareness Initiative, Clean Fuel Awareness. We're also responsible for greening government operations, the fleet program, so making sure that we're leading by example by electrifying our own federal fleet. And I also provide technical support and policy support to the zero emission vehicle infrastructure program here at Enercan. Thank you.
And David, last but not least, I just went by the line I saw on my screen.
Hi, I'm David Patterson. I'm Vice President of Corporate and Environmental Affairs for General Motors Canada. And General Motors, you've probably heard of. We're all in on electrification, from our smaller cars down to our full-size SUVs and pickup trucks, all going electric very, very quickly. And I'm really excited to be on such an august panel today, because this is where the most important thing happens, the charging, which is where the customer is involved. And so really looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, everybody. For the first time ever, I've been beaten to my questions by 2 audience members. So I think to say that there is a great deal of public interest in this is an understatement. Look forward to getting to those in a little bit. Just a reminder to the audience, please feel free to put anything you would like asked in the Q&A chat. So Raul, if we could start with you. As you mentioned, Roland Berger is an international company that works with charging networks all around the world of varying sizes. Could you set the stage for us, please, and give us a sense of how Canada is doing with its public charging infrastructure compared to other countries with similar characteristics?
Emma, thank you so much. We run possibly the largest survey of charging ecosystem across the world. It covers 45,000 respondents across 40 countries. And some of the insights that I'm going to reference right now are based on that. We found across the world the number of vehicles per public charging unit to be averaging around 13.5 today. And that number shifts every 6 months or so, because this survey is done every 6 months. So the latest number that tends to come out is approximately across the world, 13.5 vehicles are using one public charging point. Canada is at 13.4. Now that's a good point, but also a bad point. The bad point is we're expecting EVs, because of push by OEMs like GM, like Ford, like Chrysler, Stellantis, to come in and at a much faster rate. And so we would want charging networks to keep up pace with it, which means there has to be much more investment, much more focus, much more promotion for building solid charging networks that can back the very substantial EV growth that's coming out. So that's insight 1. Insight 2 is we're also going to see a space where charging will evolve across residential, fleet, long distance, but also in terms of the business models that it operates on. So it will evolve as a full service play where charging service providers could essentially end up owning the customer as much as an automotive OEM does. And thereby it will change the power dynamics in which the automotive industry has traditionally played. So we are seeing the witness of a revolution in this space, and Canada is well placed on both. So that's the high level insight, if you wanted, on where does Canada stack on public charging and what's the other insight that's coming out from the survey.
Great, thank you. Thierry, I think we're all aware that the government has made a 50,000 charger pledge as for the next round of funding that came out in budget 2022. So could you give us some insight onto how the government landed on that number, and if this will be sufficient to match the demand that Raul is projecting will happen in the next couple of years?
Very happy to. Thanks, Emma, and thanks again to Electric Autonomy and Nino for putting on this panel. I think you're really making a difference with all the past panelists that you've had and this one. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm grateful to live and work on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people here in Ottawa. On your question, it's an excellent question. I got to preface that by saying that the 50,000 charger promise or the mandate letter commitment, by saying that we have made already huge strides in delivering on the previous target of 84,500 chargers. So in fact, we currently approved projects. We are exceeding this previous target with over 36,000 chargers and 33 hydrogen fueling stations to date. So just to be clear, the new target of supporting the deployment of 50,000 chargers by 2027 is in addition to the previous one, and sort of they combine for a total of 84,500 federally supported chargers. And maybe just a quick but important parenthesis about the funding, just so we get this elephant out of the room, is in order to support these 50,000 new chargers, budget 2022 provided 400 million for NRCan, which is complemented by 500 million that Canada's Infrastructure Bank will invest in large-scale self-charging and refueling infrastructure that is revenue generating. So the question is whether 50,000 additional chargers is enough to meet future demand, and the answer is no. We know that Canada's charging requirements are around 200,000 public chargers in 2030, many times more that in 2035, 2040, and so on. About 700,000 plus chargers are needed in 2050, according to the latest Dunsky modeling. And in fact, that number is north of 5 million by mid-century when we're counting MERP charging or MERP ports as well. So the question really is why we only, quotation mark, supporting 50,000 of really 85,000 when we know that infrastructure needs to grow, to Rahul's point, needs to grow ahead of the vehicle deployment. So there's two things. Firstly, there are currently about 19,000 chargers in the ground and open to the public. Add to that the 85, and you'd be above the Dunsky modeling, which says that, again, in 2025, you need about 100,000 chargers. It is important that this infrastructure precedes the vehicle deployment to provide that public confidence. Secondly, and more importantly, chargers are being installed without the federal support, and that number will grow. The federal government will not be funding chargers indefinitely. We are seeing the business case and value proposition in many areas, such as densification in metropolitan centers, important charging hubs along the Montreal-Toronto corridor, for example, such as Kingston. This business case is improving. Where this densification is happening, we anticipate the demand being high enough that such projects will become financially more attractive without federal support. We're also anticipating that the credit generation and trading mechanism under the Clean Fuel Regulation is further helping the business case for these types of investments. So what we do at NRCan, our programs are really designed to de-risk private sector capital and encourage investments precisely in the areas where the business case is currently not strong enough. It may not be strong enough for a very long time. This includes underserved areas such as rural, remote areas, MERPs, indigenous communities, the north, and workplaces. And we are going to be focusing on these underserved areas by targeting future RFPs, and we're going to be developing maps and tools to help us and industry better locate these target areas. And quickly, just on the relationship between, I mentioned Canada's Infrastructure Bank and NRCan, we understand that the CIB, the Infrastructure Bank, will be using repayable loans, low interest loans to support larger projects with an already improved value proposition, while NRCan will be using conditionally repayable contributions, again, targeting these underserved areas. And we believe that together we're offering two complementary funding tools that should meet the need of funding applicants and industry at large. I'll leave it there. I'll have certainly lots more to say, but I'm mindful of time as well. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Terry. Just a quick follow-up. So the 33 to 35,000 chargers that have already had funding either dispersed to them or are waiting for final approval, was that ever a formal pledge, or was that just we have X amount of money and we will use it for as long as we can until it runs out? Because I'm just blanking on where that pledge might have come out formally.
So it's a combination of things. It was certainly obviously came through several budget cycles going back to 2017. The fall economic statement also mentioned that there, Canada is responsible for rolling out that infrastructure. It was in the mandate letter of our minister, I believe, in 2019, and maybe the supplementary mandate letters in 2021. They skipped 1 year due to COVID. But it's also based on some previous work that we've done with Dunsky. I have to say though that the previous work, I think was done in 2019, targeted the infrastructure rollout for the previous CEF targets of 100% by 2040. And so we obviously wanted to update that study and our modeling to target the CEF target of now 5 years previous, of 2035.
Got it. Thank you. So Louis, I'm going to bounce over to you just to keep going off of what Thierry was saying. But from your perspective, what kind of support do charging networks need at this stage to successfully operate and expand in order to meet that 50,000 station or charging station target, but with a slight twist of what else would they need to be privately funded to not have to have government funding reliance?
Big question. Thanks, Emma. Advancing transportation has always been at the core of our mission since our foundation in 2009. And I like to say that from the early on, we've took a long-term perspective because we're part of the transition. It's going to take 30 years plus, right? So when we think about expanding and deploying charger, we always like to look on the long run. So there's a business case today and there's a business case in the future. And we like to say that we want to answer the EV drivers' needs today, but also anticipate them. What I mean by that is when we install the charger, whether it's on the curb, whether it's a fast chargers, we do more than answering the EV drivers of today, the EV drivers that has an EV, if I may. What we are helping is to do the transition. We are helping people to think that they could use EV charging. So we're talking about gas car owners right now. So it's not only about serving the current, I would say, needs, but it's the future. We want people living in an apartment in Toronto, Vancouver, to think they could charge on the curb close to their apartment. We want people to think that they can drive to the cottage they like. So it's really important to see that the investment we are all doing right now might not always have a return on a specific charger, but it's really important to drive adoption. And this is why our goal to deploy 50,000 charger is important to have in that perspective. As Thierry put it, there's way right now, there is sites that have a return on investment, but a lot of it doesn't have. And the challenge we all have in Canada or even in the States is that the size of the territory. We have, so much ground to cover. So that's a challenge. And I like to say that we need to work together. And I mean government, utilities, OEM, charging network operator, to make sure we meet the North American drivers. So again, I want to kudos in Arcan because they've been a catalyst for this deployment, making sure that other level of government invests money. They are also making sure that there is private investment, but there's still a lot of work to do, as Thierry put it, to cover the whole territory. I like to point out as well, successful deployment that have been part of the Canadian story so far with Hydro-Quebec, with their electric circuit network. And one thing we succeed together in Quebec, it's to deploy a network that is not only return on investment focus and dense location, but making sure we're covering the whole map. And this is why you're seeing rates of adoption that are higher in Quebec than elsewhere. And BC Hydro has kind of do the same. Also, I was talking more specifically about, for instance, City of Montreal, who've deployed 1,000 curbside chargers. So there's people that cannot have charger at home, and we know it's 80% plus of the market. So we're making sure that Montrealers, for instance, garage orphans that park on the curb, can consider EV ownership. And this is so important for us as we're looking at the future and how we want to have a comprehensive spread of the infrastructure. So government utility has a role, but I like to talk about what's Flow's role, because a lot of station, a lot of dots on the map have been deployed so far since our foundation, at least since the last 13 years. But there's a big challenge right now with the reliability of those stations. So as I like to put it, a charger is a promise. It's a promise whether you're on the street looking at a charger, whether you are on your mobile app, on your GM Bolt to see where you're going to charge next. A charger is a promise that when you get there, you're going to get the energy to charge and keep your journey, sleep and wake up and your car is fully charged. So I think this is really something that we need to make sure that in the next round of investment from NRCan, in the next RFP of GM, for instance, and they're doing quite good right now, there's requirement on uptime to making sure that we're deploying 50,000 more charger, as Thierry put it, but they are going to be working because it's a big challenge in North America. But again, there's a lot to do. There's still a lot to exciting about what we're doing all together. But I really think we are seeing things putting together. We just need to bring the requirement more stringent to make sure we're gonna meet our target, not only in terms of number of chargers, but in terms of the experience, the quality of service we want to give to EV drivers. But I think discussions like that with all the important stakeholders are really part of it.
Thank you, Louis. And that dovetails nicely into what I wanted to get David's take on, which is, from the automaker's perspective, sorry, my watch hit the table. What is your definition of, chargers that are successfully installed, a successful public charging network? What does that look like? And what's at stake if those stringent guidelines aren't, as we put it, aren't met?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we worry about an awful lot. I mean, if you step right back, this is the biggest industrial transformation since we left horses. This is huge. I spend my time on building cathode active material plants and battery plants, and it's a huge capital investment. But as I said right off the top, what we're talking about here is the part that the customer touches and sees the most. Other than buying their electric car, before they can adopt, they want to know about charging. And we see in survey after survey, the government surveys, everybody's surveys, the number one impediment that people identify is charging. And so they want to know about it. And having a charger on paper as a commitment is great, and NRCan should be applauded for it. But if it's not up and working, it doesn't matter to the consumer. They've got to be serviced and they have to be working. So, our partner Louis, who's a great partner at Flow, their rate of servicing of their chargers is outstanding. And, we need to make sure that I walked by some in Montreal yesterday, and as you say, Louis, I mean, they're an advertisement for the future as well. But, a company like General Motors, we sell our vehicles right across Canada in the rural areas as well. And, we need adoption everywhere. And so the thing that really we worry about in this area is really two things. One is, and I really appreciate Rule's comments off the top, because the numbers are really good, but it's the rate. It's the rate of keeping up, because we're going to be pouring electric vehicles into the market. Will be some great new announcements next week from us, filling in all sizes of electric vehicles that are going to be available to people coming forward. But they want to know that the rate of chargers, which Rules told us is in the range of 15 EVs to a charger, or 13.4 for Canada. That's interesting to know. We think that California set a rate of 8-to-1. Europe is 10-to-1, so let's take 10-to-1 as an ongoing thing. But as the number of vehicles come up, we've got to keep the rate of charging, working charging, maintain charging, rural charging, fast charging. All of that has to maintain the rate as we exponentially bring more vehicles forward, or we won't be able to exponentially bring more vehicles forward. So it's the rate, and then it's the customer experience is the other thing. The customer experience of pumping gas we've known for 100 years. We're in the equivalent of internal combustion engines in about 1910 here when it comes to the whole experience. And I love the comments about who is going to own the customer. I mean, we've shared a customer with the oil companies in this industry for years and years, and now we'll share it with some others that they touch as well. And we want that customer experience to be fantastic. Using all the technology you have so that you can plan your trips, so that you can know exactly if there's a charger available. Can I book it? Can I be assured that when I pull up, it's available? And will my car work with that charger? And the technology will continue to develop. So this is a team sport, as has been said, and I think that's the most important thing. It's when we're in the industry and we're working with government, we've got to do it with us, not to us. We've got to do it together.
Gary, I see a hand. I love it.
Yeah, I hope that's okay. Let's make it a bit dynamic here. I just wanted to respond to David and really appreciate the comments that you've made, that it's a live question, right? The technology is evolving, the EV landscape is rapidly evolving. So for example, like that Danske study that we've commissioned, it is a great model and we definitely stand behind it, but it is, as I mentioned, like an evolving question. So we definitely would like to work with industry to establish, a practice where we can share different results of different modeling exercises and come together. Like, it's really a team sport, as you mentioned, David. I really like that, to come together and figure out, okay, yes, this is what we're looking at right now, but in the future it could change. Like, no model that goes to 2050 is really going to be accurate enough, right? And definitely appreciating that Canada is a very diverse country. No one province is the same, so having one ratio that would fit the entire country obviously is not the way to go. I think there's multiple ways to go about this, and we're committed to work with industry to do some deeper dives into what are the unique requirements from a provincial, territorial down to the municipal level, to get a bit more granularity out of the charging requirements for Canada.
Great, thanks. There are like a bazillion questions piling in, which is excellent. But could I just ask the audience if you could put them in the Q&A rather than the chat, just so we can keep track of who is asking what to whom? That would be very helpful. Thank you. So my question for the group next is that we've talked about a lot of what needs to be done, targets that would be great to reach. But one of the things that we haven't mentioned, two things, are plug and charge technology and how that could tie in to help advance the robustness of a public charging network, and also the issues of demand charges, which we've heard over and over remain an impediment for private site hosts to want to take on EV charging. So perhaps we could have a bit of a group brainstorm on those two subjects, and feel free to talk amongst yourselves and riff off each other's points. Louis, did you want to start us off on that?
Yes, sure. I can talk about demand charging. Maybe one thing that I can start with is, most of the car will spend 20 to 22 hours a day, if not more, in a parking lot. A lot at home, a lot at work, and so on and so forth. And I think sometimes we make the mistake as a non-EV drivers, but also as EV drivers, to think about EVs like we were talking about fueling gas station model. So one thing that I want to stress is, as much as super fast charger or super duper fast charger are exciting, fascinating technology, they are really expensive and they are stressing the grid. So they're part of the solution, but I want to make sure they're not the only solution as we're deploying network. Like, a lot of 50 kilowatt chargers, 100 kilowatt, 200 kilowatt, level 2 curbside chargers for MERB, for people living in an apartment, are really important. And if we look at making sure we deploy chargers where everybody park, 20, 22 hours a day, it's going to be easier for us to manage the demand charging. And why we want to manage demand charging is EVs are a big threat to our grid right now. And there's a lot of investment to be done on top of the chargers by themselves on the grid itself. So if we're tackling that more as EV can be the best ally to the electrical grid, meaning that if we can tap into all that storage, and maybe GM has a perspective into it, we're going to help the transition, not only in making sure our fuel is electricity, but also the grid is supported by storage that can integrate more renewables. So this is something that I would throw out there for the team to consider.
Maybe
And
I
if
can
I
jump
may
in
just-
on that, Emma.
Yeah, please go ahead, David.
Oh, sorry, and then I'll back to you, Raul. But just to build on it too, because I'll tell a little story of something that came my way last week. And so we're pulling out the stops to make EVs available in all sizes to everybody. And so I had a story out of Toronto where we've got a variety of distribution companies across Ontario that control the relationship between your buying of electricity and your home. And we've helped in, for example, with our vehicles, we help people to get a home charger installed as part of the purchase of a Chevrolet Bolt. And we had an instance this week where someone was the 5th or 6th or 7th electric vehicle on their street. That's great. That's exciting. That's the way we want to go. But that meant that we needed a new transformer on that street because of the pull on the electric system. And under the laws of Ontario, that meant that purchaser of that vehicle was responsible for the cost of a new $10,000 transformer on the street. It could be $15,000. So they brought the car back because they're not going to spend $10,000 in addition to pay for a transformer for their whole street. So when we have the discussion with Thierry and we all sit down and talk about how we're going to take this 10, 20 years into the future, we've got to have those distribution companies, largely the provincial utilities like Hydro-Quebec, brilliant. And they're doing some great stuff with Flow and BC Hydro, et cetera. But, across Canada, it's not the same. The grid is not the same. And so, we need to have the people that are delivering the electricity as part of this discussion as to how we'll do it. And I won't even touch on apartment buildings. I know there's lots of questions there.
If I may just add to one point there, we often tend to think of charging and EVs from a passenger perspective, but there's also a very strong commercial perspective. And we are tending to find across the world, commercial fleets actually getting electrified slightly ahead of the curve of passenger fleets in some applications. Now, that's point one. So it's not just a problem for the passenger side, it's also a commercial world problem that we need to address. The second part is in that world specifically, and that comment comes more from reading some of the questions, which are around range anxiety and speed of charging, and that was what Louis was saying. Applications are so varied that you actually have commercial fleets that run 50, 60 kilometers a day and not much more. Or you may have commercial application fleets, which are long distance, which might run 300 kilometers a day and even more than that. There are different charging needs that come out of it. So it's not that fast charging or high-speed charging is the necessary answer or the only answer for our world. We will need a mix of charging solutions. And a lot of that will actually be low-speed charging, low-cost, low-speed charging, interspersed with high-speed charging, either on a fleet or on a retail format. And that's point one. The second point is we need to remember this is slightly different from the last revolution of fuel-based distribution of energy. Because in a charging ecosystem, you have simultaneous transaction of energy, cash, and data. And so it requires a far more complex organization to be created. And we need to leverage all the existing infrastructure that's coming through, whether it's from the utilities or whether it's from the data providers, et cetera, to be able to take it forward. So that's just an amplification of the points that Louis was making. And then further, that was amplified by David as well.
So if I can continue on the great discussion with the team. So I agree with David, like we need utility to be investing as much as, our network is smart. We can put a lot of software to really help the grid to be smarter, I would say, and to be part of the transition with the storage in the car, we still need a lot of investment. So again, putting more emphasis on, we need to coordinate between OEM, between a government, between network operator. Are we going to do that investment? It is happening. It is better than 10 years ago, I have to say, but we're going to get, we're going to need to get better at it. And Emma, just, recouping with your first question, right now we are interconnected with other network, with some utility, but it's starting. But to your plug and charge comment, right now on level 2 charging, we don't know the state of charge of the battery. So as we're scaling the network, plug and charge will be better on the experience of the EV drivers. Will also be better at us knowing, what's the state of the million batteries that are going to be over North America, and how we can charge them, knowing the customer behavior, how they used to charge. So it's going to evolve using better technologies, but it's just, again, we cannot stress that it's many industry, energy, meeting transport industry, for instance, that are trying to coordinate. And I cannot stress enough what Raul put at the beginning and David did emphasize on. The challenge is right now, everybody wants EVs with, the price of oil or everything. And it's hard to deliver, but this is going to last a year, 2 years, 3 years. And then the market's going to be poured with a lot of great EV, from the small sedan to big pickup trucks. So the coordination needs to go faster and faster between all of us. That's for sure.
Could I just add something to your point, Louis, and others? I recognize this is an EV panel, but we're talking about electrification of transportation, yes, but we're also talking about writ large electrification of the economy. So the pancaking, the layering effect of electrifying transportation, electrifying buildings, electrifying industrial processes should be considered as well. We can't just look at silos, and utilities can't just look at transportation as being one bucket and industrial process being another bucket. They need to be looked at more holistically. So I fully appreciate the need for utilities to be sitting around the table and having these discussions. And many of them are, you mentioned Hydro-Quebec and BC Hydro, Louis, and others as well. We've done a study a number of years ago on the grid impact. And in the sort of short to medium term, obviously, as Rahul mentioned and David, the challenges really are at sort of the distribution level, sort of the last mile, the transformers, and so on. But there is definitely a value proposition in the longer term that utilities see EVs and electrification of other processes in the economy as a huge boon to their bottom line, right? They're seeing EVs as a way to fill the valley of when EVs charge at night, they can fill that demand valley with EV charging, for example. So I think there needs to be a recognition that utilities, they have to come to the table, but they also need to be honest enough to say that this is going to be a value proposition for them as well. They're in the business of selling electricity, so they're very much looking forward to having more and more EVs on the road.
Thanks, everyone. In a slight break with tradition, I'm going to bounce into audience questions 5 minutes early because there are a lot and they are really insightful. So if everyone is okay with that, we will see what people are asking. So Thierry, the first one is for you. I'm in site acquisition and government relations. What is the role that Canadian municipalities will play in approving charging stations? Will there be more regulation via building permits, et cetera, or will there be exemptions from the federal government?
That is a great question. I'll try my best to answer it. I'm not really fully equipped to answer it, but I'll try. So municipalities definitely have an important role to play when it comes to electrification of their own fleet, for example. And we've been fortunate enough to have been able to work with many municipalities across Canada to fund chargers for their own purposes, for their own usage and so on. With regards to building permits, I know that there's a trend in certain municipalities like Richmond and BC and Vancouver to make existing buildings EV ready, to make parking lots, to install the conduit into parking lots and so on. I'm not sure about exemptions, but I also know, I see Rahul nodding his head, but I also know that the federal government has a commitment to make existing buildings EV ready. So we're still exploring ways to follow through on that commitment through potential future programming.
Thank you.
Just adding one point to it, and it's not from Canada, it's a reference actually of what we're seeing in the UK and in Norway and in France on fleet electrification, for example, electrification that postal companies need to do. For all fleet electrification, which is relying on sites that are essentially leased from landowners, there's massive resistance from landowners to install additional chargers and additional electrical easements on their site because it reduces long-term rental yields of their sites. So it's not just an issue which the government has to push, but we have to, as a group, work with our stakeholders, which also includes private sector participants, and allow for an understanding to evolve as to how this can be addressed. So it's a block on all sides, and all sides need to work together on this topic.
Thanks. I'm going to jump back in here to say that Aaron Stewart has arrived. Very nice to see you, Aaron. Sorry about your very chaotic afternoon, but we're really happy to have you. And we've been spending the last 45 minutes or so chatting about challenges to rolling out a public EV charging network that meets the need for today and definitely the demand for tomorrow and the years after. So could I grab your perspective, please, on the unique challenges faced by remote Indigenous communities that have challenges of being chronically underserviced, and what needs to be done in order to make sure this is a really equitable adoption and transition towards electrification?
Yeah, absolutely. Can everybody hear me? Okay,
Gotcha.
excellent. Thank you. So as Emma mentioned, I just arrived in Kuujjuaq, Nunavik, and for those that may not be aware, Nunavik is in northern Quebec, Inuit land. So we're going to be doing a number of project tours tomorrow here for their geothermal facility. We're doing a Met Tower tour, and we're actually talking about EVs. So it's really great timing on this. So one of the challenges that we're seeing right now in terms of the adoption of electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure is it's still very much for the early adopters in communities. And so, we have, for example, through our Charge Up program, where we're offering a 50% subsidy for electric vehicle charging station. And I know with Louis Tremblay, we're working with Flow quite a bit on that. But even with that 50%, it's still pretty slow in terms of people wanting to get involved. And that comes critically in terms of a couple of things that I feel that are needed. If we look to places like the BC government, they're offering a 90% subsidy. That is not available in any other province or territory in the same regard from a provincial or territorial level. And we're also finding that, so it's a more government funding that I think is required, but it's also the capacity building around community learning and understanding. And then the third piece being, they're really, in terms of having a charging station, you need to have people with electric vehicles. And so there is a growing demand within communities, but in terms of the supply being able to keep up with that and the capacity that's still kind of newly being introduced, it's very early days. And so we find that where EVs have been most adopted is actually when we're looking at supporting fleet management in a public setting. So, I'm sitting here in the Makivik office. Makivik is the Inuit Dev Corp in Nunavik. Nunavik, and we're having discussions about what an electric vehicle fleet looks like, and then how are we making sure that those electric vehicles, how are we making sure we have more electric vehicles, and then we have the charging stations to follow that, and the supply. So it's that's one of the things that we're also looking at, and we're seeing that in other areas. Great example would be ATCO has partnered with Stony Nakota on their casino, and I know Soyuz partnered with Fortis, where they're installing more electric vehicle charging stations there. And so it's right now it's a real emphasis on where there's tourism and people coming to community, as opposed to necessarily the huge uptake of people purchasing electric vehicles. And where we're seeing there's a lot more projects at the moment is really in the demonstration phase. So purchasing a couple of vehicles. We also have some people that are purchasing electric golf carts, electric boats. We have a couple electric boats on the West Coast that we're looking at, and lawnmowers. And so people are bringing them in different ways, but it is still early days on the capacity building side. So I hope I'm not repeating anything that my fellow panelists have said, and I'm happy to get into any more detail or answer questions, but I apologize greatly again for being late.
Not a problem at all. And I'd love to open up Aaron's comments to the group to respond to. I mean, I think it's so interesting that, Aaron, you're bringing the perspective of different types of vehicles. It's not just the Nissan Leaf on the road kind of thing. So please, group, respond.
David, go ahead. I see you have your hand up.
Well, I'll be quick to just add in, because when Aaron said that, talking about the type of vehicles, I can't resist a quick commercial that the first Canadian EV plant will open up later this year, producing our Bright Drop cargo delivery vans. And so there will be more of those available in Canada coming soon. And that, you think of the number of parcels that get delivered around the world, what an opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas. And so, but bigger batteries. And of course, we have our own Ultium batteries and we'll build that. But if the battery is 4, 5, 10 times larger than a Chevrolet Bolt, then that has something to do with charging as well. And we need to think about that. Likewise, you're going to have electric pickup trucks, really good electric pickup trucks coming into the market next year. And, the Chevrolet Silverado EV and the Sierra. So we're going to have full size, and a lot of these are the real work trucks that do real work in rural communities. And so I think Aaron's point is absolutely right on, and it goes back again to the grid and the chicken and the egg, etc. But the eggs are all coming.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, David, on just the size of vehicle, and looking more at trucks, because if you look anywhere in the north, I can look out my window right now, everybody owns a truck. And so I can't be talking about a Nissan Leaf and what that's going to be looking like. We need to be looking at what's suitable for a northern environment, something that's durable, something that holds a lot, something that people use day-to-day lives. That's where the adoption will come from.
Just a quick question for you, Aaron. First of all, thanks for joining. I hope your flight was okay in the end. Really glad to have you on the panel. I was just at the beginning mentioning that part of the NRCan funding, the 400 million, is really to focus in, to hone in on those underserved areas like multi-unit residential buildings, workplaces, rural, remote, but also Indigenous communities in the north. And so we're hoping to do this in a number of ways. Obviously, like targeted RFPs to really specifically target certain areas, but also, for example, like increasing the funding contribution, the maximum funding contribution to 75% as opposed to 50%. And under the clean fuel and electric vehicle awareness initiatives that I lead, we're sort of trying to have dedicated streams specifically for Indigenous communities or Indigenous-led projects. Is there anything else that you think we can do? I mean, obviously there is, but I just really want to have that conversation with you and see how else we as a government can support the deployment of charging infrastructure, but also increasing that level of awareness and really drive the demand for ZEVs and infrastructure in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I'm really happy to hear that that's going to be increasing to 75% because I think that that will make a huge difference. One thing that I think has been good is the flexibility that allow communities to make decisions about their own partners. But at the same time, I think that that's kind of a hindrance to some people applying. And so I think that the supports around these programs, like, with ICE and what we're doing and how we're working with Flow, for example, right now, is really critical to the success of that. With all of our charge up program, we're offering kind of technical services and capacity to go along with that, and training so people actually understand what's going on. Because at the end of the day, you could have a community champion who's working on energy, they're working on climate, they're working on infrastructure, they're working on economic development. And to take the time to work specifically on this is a huge ask. And so we need to make sure that that's properly supported on the capacity building side first and foremost. And I think too is, we can look at this in terms of multi-residential buildings, residential homes. We can look at this on a fleet management side, but I just think that it's the one-to-one relationships here are more important than anything else. And to be able to hold those relationships and help people understand and get there, that's where we're going to have the most uptake. Right now, kind of the blanket RFP approach with people that don't have the connections necessarily to make it work is great, but it's still the person power to write the proposals and put everything together that is a barrier at the moment.
Louis, I see your
Yeah.
hand is up.
Yeah. And Erin, I'm part of the group that, a lot of empathy for you landing from a plane. And one thing that I can answer, Thierry, and the question related to Erin's need or what we discussed before is that it's something to incentivize to give up to 100% of the contribution of the charger initially, but the charger is gonna be up and running for 10 years plus if it's a durable chargers, and there's costs related to it. So we need to make sure we can install it, but we need to make sure we can maintain it. So we need reliable charger. This is something that, performance standards should be put in the incentive. But if the charger is not as visited, for instance, than a downtown Toronto fast charger, where Erin is right now, maybe the business case is not there. But if we want to make the transition, everybody needs to switch to EVs. So my question to you are, not warning, but thing to consider is it's good to incentivize the purchasing installation of the first charger. You need to make sure it's going to be reliable for the next 10 years. If it's a durable charger, it's going to be, less a burden in terms of operational expense, but still there will be less revenue out of the chargers. So probably really hard for some customers, some people that own those chargers in rural, remote location, and we need to make sure we take care of the next 10 years. Like I like to say to my team that the real business starts when the charger is installed, not before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just on the 10 years and the profitability or potential profitability. So we recognize that, again, in areas where the business case is not strong, inherently, their profitability is not going to occur. So we do waive after 3 years if there's no profitability. We do waive the repayable portion. So that's why we always say our contributions are conditionally repayable. They're also not repayable for non-for-profit organizations or indigenous organizations or any projects that are under $100,000. On the reliability, I'll take that back to the team to see if there's anything we can do to sort of increase the strength of what we're currently doing, which, as you know, we're making it, we're making selections based on projects that have a really strong operation and maintenance plan to make sure that the charger is really up and running. The uptime is there once it's in the ground. But yeah, I'll take that back to the team. I also, maybe just for the benefit of everyone on the panel, want to put on your radar that we're holding a stakeholder session on the program design of the next iteration of zero emission vehicle infrastructure program at the end of July. So a bit of a plug there, but please stay tuned for that. We'll be sure to send out invitations to everyone.
And if I may, 30-second reply, Emma, is It wasn't a finger pointing at you, Thierry. Like, you've been, pretty good at evolving your program to support this. Is just, we have 98% of time on our network, and the last part of it is, some people are disconnecting from the network, or they don't want to pay. They don't want to pay because they don't see the return. So it's not about paying or refunding the investment that have been good by the government. It's just maintaining the operational cost of maintaining the chargers. So we're doing a lot to make sure we continue to support some of those chargers, but it's a burden on our business. So we're trying to find a way to make sure that the station's gonna still be connected and maintained, because we have to pay people to maintain them at some point. But it's a challenge for us to go from 98% to 100% and make sure there's a return on investment at the network level. Just some comment for us to improve.
Sorry, and I'm going to dive back in here with just a note for the audience. I know you had a ton of questions that we didn't get to, and I will take it upon myself to find answers to as many of them as I can and post them on our website so that you can view them after. But before we have to sign off, just quickly from everybody, one of our questions is, when will publicly available EVSEs be able to use credit cards to pay for the charging experience? Most charging networks now use different apps, et cetera. So is there going to be a simplification that happens? And I will leave it to you to discuss.
Well, we didn't really talk an awful lot about that customer experience, and that's going to be one of the biggest drivers of this, and something we at General Motors are focused an awful lot on now, because we've had the benefit of having all our cars being connected through OnStar for decades, and so we expect our customers to be able to use that connectivity and to be able to know where the charger is it available. I just plug it in, I pay from my app that I'm already pre-signed up for. So it's as easy as that, and showing up and going, and making sure that our partners that we work with are doing that. We're installing our own chargers as well to try and prime the pump. And but there's going to be a lot of technological development in mobile connectivity and the like. But to Louis' earlier comment, you've got to know that when you show up, it's going to work. We can't have. Look at the outage we had across Canada with our cell phones. Can you imagine that with chargers? We have to have that dependability going forward, and so we've got to work this together with many different partners to make it work. A lot of innovation will come from us in the car business on this, but and with the batteries too. So we're going to have to keep up with ourselves as well.
Thanks, and Aaron, I'm going to just pull you in quick to get the last word. Does a credit card payment system, does that actually simplify the charging experience in more remote communities, or is there a better way that needs to be incorporated?
Absolutely. That was just going to be my point in terms of the simplification of payment and streamlining things, because, right now, as it stands, my phone from the South does not work here. So when we're talking about all of these apps and what the opportunity is here, at the end of the day, I'm paying for my cab with cash. Sometimes the credit cards are there, sometimes they're not. And my phone currently does not work. And so I think just in terms of, as we think about this and what this looks like in a remote diesel dependent environment, it has to be a consideration. And it's something, and again, it kind of comes back to those partners that understand the landscape on the ground and the how important those players are in this conversation. So
thank you. And Nino, I'm going to have to pass it back to you now. Clearly, we under budgeted for time on this, but a really fabulous discussion, everyone. Thank you so much. And we will sign off from Nino.
Thanks very much, Emma. And excuse me, a big thank you to you for moderating. A massive thanks to Erin, Raul, Thierry, David, and Louis for sharing their expertise. It's kudos to all of those leaders for coming on board and sharing their knowledge. It's not an easy thing for them to do and for them to make time for, but it really makes a difference to this movement when we do have leaders coming forward like this to really share their knowledge. So thank you to them all. Just again to the audience, I'm so sorry we didn't get to more of the questions, but as Emma says, we will be reporting on them. Special thank you to Roland Berger once again for supporting this event and making it possible. Recording will be available on electricautonomy.ca in the next few days. And look out for the announcements for our forthcoming webinars on some exciting future mobility topics. We'll be doing more on EV charging, also on alternative fuels and their role in medium and heavy duty vehicles as we enter the transition, and also on intelligent transportation systems and what we need to do to get ready for those. Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.